Have you ever heard of a widowed mother buying a neglected Kansas farm at auction, only to uncover hidden diaries from the Civil War and top-secret letters signed by President Abraham Lincoln himself? If that sounds unbelievable, wait until you hear the full story. In this remarkable tale, each dusty trunk opened reveals another layer of history, bravery, espionage, and hope coursing through the Underground Railroad. And just when you think you know where it's headed, a hidden vault in the orchard flips everything upside down. Stick with us through to the end, because what starts as one family's desperate move to avoid homelessness soon becomes a legacy that could reshape our understanding of American history. Want to see how this incredible discovery impacts the future of the farm, the family, and an entire community? Listen to the whole story to find out, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales like this. Your support helps us bring these powerful, real-life adventures to you. Evelyn Brooks stood on the peeling front porch of her cramped rental house, her eyes scanning a pile of overdue bills clutched in her left hand. Winter was approaching, and the sting of Kansas's November breeze felt merciless, matching the dread gnawing at her heart. Just a month ago, her landlord had given notice that the property was being sold, leaving Evelyn, a widowed mother of two, scrambling for a new place to live. She was 38, still young in many ways, but each line on her face felt etched by grief and fatigue. Her husband, Michael, had passed away from cancer 2 years prior. That loss had emptied their bank account in medical bills and broken all sense of security. Now, it was just her and the children, 7-year-old Abigail and 7-year-old Thomas, facing eviction if she couldn't find an affordable home fast. One night, while searching online for any halfway decent property that wouldn't exceed her modest savings, Evelyn had stumbled upon a curious listing, an old farmstead in Renshaw County, 300 acres, complete with a dilapidated barn, a 2-story farmhouse built in the late 1800s, and a rumored connection to the Civil War era. The images online weren't appealing: cracked windows, warped boards, missing shingles, and a for auction label that had been marked down multiple times. Real estate agents had likely shown it repeatedly to no avail. The summary mentioned structural issues, overgrown fields, and in need of significant restoration. Yet the price was shockingly low. For a moment, Evelyn wondered if this was a hoax or a haunted house scheme, but desperation made the mind flexible. She wasn't new to challenges. Shortly after Michael died, she'd sold off most of their belongings to cover funeral costs, then worked 2 shifts daily at a local diner to keep the kids fed. The children were bright, resilient, but they could sense their mother's stress. Thomas had taken to quietly slipping homemade love cards under her bedroom door, and Abigail often offered to help wash dishes despite barely reaching the sink. Evelyn had done everything in her power to hide her worries, though the subtle slump of her shoulders told the real story. Now, with this looming eviction, they needed a place, any place to call home. The uncertain possibility of a farm with a giant needs work sign was better than living in her car. The day before the auction, Evelyn drove her battered pickup truck an hour out of town to see the property for herself. On approach, she passed wide-open fields, patchworks of wheat and hay, under a sky that stretched forever. There was a stillness, a quiet hush, as though time had paused out here. Reaching the farm's gravel driveway, she gazed at the sagging barn roof, the broken fence posts, and the peeling paint on the farmhouse. The place looked tired, forsaken, and yet she felt a strange pull. The rickety porch resembled her life worn down, but still standing. In that moment, she decided if the price remained as low as predicted, she'd take the risk. Her meager savings plus the modest life insurance left from Michael might be enough. It was a gamble: either rescue this old farm from ruin or resign to sleeping in motels and couch surfing. Evelyn rolled the dice. 2 days later, she found herself inside the Renshaw County Courthouse, perched on a wooden bench that squeaked whenever anyone shifted. The room smelled of dampness, old paper, and faint traces of coffee. The property auction for the old Renshaw farmstead was about to begin. A handful of locals and a couple of real estate investors hovered near the front, flipping through paperwork. Evelyn clung to her bidding card, ignoring the intrusive thought that she was drastically unprepared for a major purchase. "Mama, are you okay?" Abigail whispered, sensing her mother's tension. Evelyn nodded and tried to smile. She'd brought the kids along because she had no sitter and also because she believed this was a family decision, not hers alone. The auctioneer, a balding man with a slow Midwestern drawl, laid out the basic facts: 300 acres, farmhouse built 1879, barns in uncertain condition. Minimum bidding starts at $120,000. Property sold as is. Evelyn's heart pounded. That minimum price was deceptively low. She had a strict upper limit of $165,000, everything she had left. If it jumped higher, she'd lose. A real estate developer in a trim suit started the bidding at the base price, and almost immediately another man, likely a flipper, raised it to $125,000. Evelyn forced herself to lift her card. $127,000. The man in the suit raised it to $130,000, then $132,000. She swallowed thickly. Just as she contemplated how to stretch her budget, the developer abruptly dropped out at $140,000 with a shrug. No one else was bidding. Evelyn dared not look behind her. She felt eyes on her. The last competitor paused at $142,000, tested it once more at $145,000, then gave a faint laugh. He turned around, raising both hands in defeat. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Going once, going twice. Sold at $145,000 to the lady in the back. A wave of relief and terror crashed over Evelyn. She'd actually won. She owned a farm she'd barely seen. Abigail squeezed her hand, uncertain whether to be excited or frightened. Moments later, the courthouse staff guided her through signing documents. She wrote the largest check of her life, her hand trembling slightly. With each pen stroke, it became more and more real. She was now the owner of a rickety farm. A gentleman behind the desk gave her a sympathetic nod. "If you need references for local handymen or structural surveys, let me know. Ms. Brooks, that old place might surprise you." She couldn't decipher whether he meant it as encouragement or warning. Outside, under the courthouse's aging oak trees, Evelyn let the children run around for a moment. She clutched the deed, scanning the official words "property transfer of the Renshaw farmstead to Evelyn Brooks." It felt surreal. She was a widow, a diner waitress, a mother barely hanging on, yet she'd just purchased a piece of land bigger than any dream she'd ever dared to have. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity, while another part urged her to cry. A gentle wind rustled the leaves above, and she half expected some cosmic sign to appear. But the sky remained silent. The only sign was the unwavering determination in her heart. If this farm was the only hope left, she would make it work. Moving day arrived under a drab, overcast sky. Evelyn borrowed a small trailer from the diner's cook and packed their lives into boxes, mostly clothes. A few photos of Michael, plus the children's beloved stuffed toys. Their entire existence fit into one cramped trailer. She let Abigail and Thomas ride up front in the truck with her, insisting they wear seatbelts as the roads turned bumpier near the farm. Upon arriving, she saw the place in full daylight. The barn's faded red planks drooped precariously. The yard was a tangle of tall grass and weeds, and the house looked even more neglected than she remembered. Shingles were missing, windows had cracks, and a large hole in the roof allowed a small family of birds to come and go at leisure. Local volunteers from the church helped unload. They seemed friendly enough, though some exchanged uncertain glances at the condition of the property. "You sure you want to raise kids here?" an older woman quietly asked. Evelyn stiffened. She didn't need pity or second-guessing. "We'll be just fine," she replied, summoning a confidence she didn't entirely feel. After 2 hours, the small group of helpers dispersed, leaving Evelyn alone with her children and a house full of half-unpacked boxes. The wind whistled through a broken window pane, creating an eerie echo. Thomas discovered a corner of the living room floor that sloped downward with a soft creak. "Mama, the boards here feel weird," he said, stomping lightly. Dust plumed up around his sneakers. "Don't break anything," Evelyn cautioned, though she too wondered if something was beneath the floor. She made a mental note to eventually check the house's foundations, remembering it was built over a century ago. After all, old farmhouses were notorious for hidden compartments or curious designs. As dusk approached, she heated up canned soup on a portable stove. The house's electricity had been turned on, but half the outlets didn't work. No one had lived here for years. She lit a couple of lanterns to offset the dimness. The children, exhausted from the day's move, huddled under blankets in the front room. In the faint glow, Evelyn observed the peeling wallpaper with patterns that must have been fashionable 50 years ago. There were scuffs, holes, and decades of wear, but she tried to imagine it as a warm, inviting home once upon a time. Before bed, she set up 2 air mattresses for the kids, covering them with their favorite blankets. Thomas curled up with a stuffed bear named Cubby, while Abigail clutched a rabbit named Flopsy. Evelyn had always admired how quickly children adapted. This house, for all its flaws, already felt safer to them than any cheap motel. After tucking them in, she sat by the window, glimpsing the barn through the shadows. Tomorrow, she'd start cleaning, repairing, and hopefully find out if the structural damage was fixable on her limited budget. She reminded herself of a mantra she'd relied on since Michael passed, one step at a time. The floor might be crooked, the walls might be battered, but this was theirs. She promised herself she wouldn't fail her family no matter what secrets or struggles this old farm concealed. Early the next morning, Evelyn ventured outside to examine the property more thoroughly. The children trailed behind, still in pajamas, curious about this new world of tall grass and open sky. Chickens from a neighboring farm had wandered onto her land, pecking at insects near the porch steps. She noticed, with surprise, that part of the fence line was intact. Although it sagged in multiple places, somewhere in the distance, a tractor's engine droned, reminding her she was truly in farm country now. The barn was her first major concern. Its broad sliding doors, once painted red, were nearly unhinged. Inside, old hay bales had rotted into mush, and sunbeams broke through cracks in the roof. A rusted tractor skeleton sat in one corner. She crouched down, brushing aside cobwebs, discovering a rummage of old tools, a worn pickaxe, a pitchfork missing 2 tines, and a battered wheelbarrow. Nothing that looked salvageable. Just as she was about to step away, she spotted a faint carving on one of the barn's beams, half hidden by dust. Renshaw 1912, the original family name, presumably. It gave her a brief, haunted sense of connection to strangers who'd worked and lived on these same grounds over a century ago. She led the children back toward the house, crossing a yard that sloped gently downward. That was when she noticed a partially boarded-up entrance at the side of the foundation, like a storm cellar. The wood looked warped from years of rain, and the hinges were rusted. Instinctively, she felt a twinge of unease. Still, something about the old cellar piqued her curiosity. She tried to tug it open, but it refused to budge. Maybe another day, she muttered. Around mid-morning, a neighbor arrived on a dusty ATV. She introduced herself as Joan Henderson, a stout woman in her late 60s with bright green eyes. Joan lifted her cap in greeting. Heard someone finally bought this place. You must be Evelyn, she said, voice amiable. I live just down the road. Figured you might need a hand or at least some company. Relieved by the friendly tone, Evelyn welcomed Joan inside. The older woman offered stories about the region, how Renshaw County got its name from a prominent Civil War soldier, and how the old farm had once been proud and prosperous. But after a series of tragedies, the last known family members abandoned it in the 1960s. Since then, it passed through various hands, none staying long. People around here say it's haunted, Joan added, sipping the instant coffee Evelyn provided. She laughed at the notion, but there was a seriousness beneath. I think it's just an old place with old problems. This land has a lot of history, some good, some painful. Evelyn nodded, listening. She glanced at her children playing in the next room, hearts full of wonder. Haunted or not, she wanted them to grow up safe, maybe even learn about life on a farm. She asked Joan if it was possible to keep a few goats or a cow for milk. Joan said yes, but recommended fixing fences first. It was a small moment, but it grounded Evelyn if she was going to live here. She needed a plan for how to make this farm productive again. As Joan left, Evelyn felt marginally more at ease. She wasn't alone. The local community, or at least some folks like Joan, would lend a hand. "If you find something strange on this property, holler," Joan said with a smile. Evelyn gave a slight laugh. She wondered what strange might mean in the context of a farm rumored to hold ghosts and secrets from centuries past. By the third day, Evelyn began a systematic cleaning of the old farmhouse. She tackled the second-floor bedrooms first, pulling up moth-eaten rugs and tearing down mildewed curtains. Dust coated her arms, and she sneezed repeatedly. Abigail tried to help but ended up playing make-believe with a broomstick. Thomas discovered a half-broken rocking chair in one corner and spent an hour pushing it back and forth, mesmerized by its creak. Each piece of debris felt like removing a layer of someone else's life, a faint echo of distant inhabitants. While hauling a stack of ruined linens to the trash, Evelyn stumbled upon a small closet she'd overlooked. It had been camouflaged by an old mirror leaning against the wall. Inside, she found a battered trunk with leather straps. It didn't look Civil War era, more likely from the 1940s or 1950s. Judging by its style, the lock was rusted shut, and it took several minutes of prying with a screwdriver before it gave way. She flipped the trunk open, expecting maybe old blankets or worthless knickknacks. Instead, she found a stash of letters tied with twine, pressed newspapers about World War II, and a worn diary. The diary's first page bore elegant, cursive Anna Renshaw, 1943. Evelyn's heart fluttered. She gingerly turned a few pages, reading descriptions of rural life during the war, rationing sugar, collecting scrap metal, worrying about loved ones overseas. She felt a lump in her throat, imagining a woman not so different from herself trying to keep a household afloat during uncertain times. In the trunk's corner lay a folded American flag and a photograph of a young man in uniform, presumably Anna's husband or brother. Carefully, Evelyn tucked these items back. She decided to read them more thoroughly later, possibly after consulting with the local historical society. It struck her as something valuable, not in money but in heritage, a part of the farm's story. In the kitchen, the walls cried out for new paint, and the plumbing under the sink leaked. Evelyn used duct tape to temporarily seal the pipe, making a mental note to call a plumber when she had more funds. She hung a few pictures of Michael, one with him fishing, another of them dancing at their wedding. Seeing his face here felt bittersweet, a connection between her old life and this new chapter. She missed him every day, especially moments when she was unsure of her decisions. He'd been the calm, grounded one in the relationship. Now she had to fill that role alone. Late afternoon found her outside again, rummaging through a dilapidated shed near the barn in search of anything she could repurpose. Most of it was junk, broken pottery, rusted metal scraps, half a barrel. That was when she noticed a faint set of footprints in the dirt, children's footprints, going behind the shed. Her heart rate quickened. Abigail Thomas, she called, rounding the corner. The footprints led to a small trapdoor in the ground, partly concealed by vines. A chill slid down her spine. She called again. No response. Then, as she took a step forward, Thomas poked his head out from behind the vines, startling her. "Mom, come look, I found something cool." She exhaled, both relieved and exasperated. Sometimes she envied their fearless curiosity. Thomas ushered Evelyn to the trapdoor's edge, gesturing excitedly. The wooden hatch was about 3 feet by 3 feet, with metal handles on either side. She knelt down to get a closer look. It didn't appear to be a root cellar; those were usually near the house. This was deeper into the property, behind the shed. Abigail arrived, panting from running across the yard. "We were playing hide and seek," she explained. "Thomas found this hatch. It was kinda stuck, but we pulled the vines off. Indeed, the wooden surface was rotted in places, but the hinges seemed surprisingly sturdy." Evelyn hesitated. She glanced back at the farmhouse, then at the children's expectant faces. The last thing she wanted was to start exploring a potentially dangerous underground space with no flashlight or safety gear. But curiosity tugged at her. "All right, but let me get a flashlight," she said, motioning for them to step aside. Within minutes, she returned with a flashlight, a small toolkit, and a determined expression. She eased the trapdoor open, straining as the rusted hinges groaned in protest. A damp, earthy smell wafted up. Peering down, she saw a set of stone steps descending into darkness. The beam of her flashlight revealed stone walls. Evelyn's heart thumped. Was this some form of old storage, a hidden hideout? She coaxed the children to stay back while she tested the steps. They held her weight, though moisture made them slick. "Wait here," she instructed, voice steady but eyes cautious. Carefully, she descended 5 steps, shining the light around. The space below was small, perhaps 8 by 10 feet, with rough-hewn stone walls. Barrels lined one side, while old crates piled in a corner. She inched closer to the crates, noticing something odd stenciled lettering reading carbide and lantern fuel, possibly used for old lamps or farm tools. She realized her breath was catching. Being underground, uncertain of what she might find, was unnerving. But nothing appeared immediately dangerous, no large animals, no bottomless pit. Just decades, maybe centuries, of dust and a sense of lost time. She let the beam of light roam across the far wall. That's when she spotted a heavy, iron-bound chest that looked far older than the trunk she'd discovered upstairs. This chest, half buried under rotted tarp, had an air of antiquity. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Carefully, she brushed away cobwebs. The chest was locked, the metal clasp intact. Faint lettering on top spelled something like RN-W. It was definitely from the farm's earlier era. Maybe Anna Renshaw had known about it, or maybe it predated her altogether. Her mind raced with questions. Could this contain Civil War relics, family heirlooms, or something else entirely? Part of her wanted to open it immediately, but she also felt a surge of responsibility, like stumbling upon a piece of history. She retreated up the steps, re-emerging into daylight, where Abigail and Thomas waited, eyes wide. "What's in there?" Mama asked Abigail, practically bouncing on her toes. Evelyn swallowed, glancing between her children and the trap door. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it might be something important. Let's close it up, but now, I need to think about this." That evening, after feeding the children a simple dinner of beans and rice, Evelyn laid in the living room on an old sofa someone had donated. She couldn't stop thinking about the locked chest beneath the property. The house itself was a puzzle, from the trunk in the closet with 1940s letters to the strange, sealed storm cellar near the house, and now this hidden hatch in the yard. Each day revealed more layers. She remembered Joan Henderson's words about the land being full of history, some good, some painful. Unable to sleep, she spent hours flipping through Anna Renshaw's diary from 1943. By lantern light, she read passages detailing everyday struggles, ration books, saving bacon grease for the war effort, mending socks over and over. Then she found a reference to family relics from the old war. Anna mentioned how her grandfather once told her of a chest hidden on the property that dated back to the Civil War. He called it Grandpa Renshaw's secret, implying there were important documents or letters from someone of great significance. Anna wrote about wanting to find it someday, but being too frightened of the old well and cellar. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened at the parallel. Could the chest she found be the same one Anna wrote about midway through the diary? A sentence caught her eye. "They say President Lincoln himself commissioned a special set of items to be safeguarded here. Something about Pinkerton's men and coded letters. I wish I knew the truth." Evelyn's mouth went dry. She knew Pinkerton was a famous figure from the Civil War era, the founder of a detective agency that worked for the Union. What was such a thing doing in rural Kansas on this random farm? She felt like she'd tumbled into a historical novel. Early the next morning, she decided to confide in Joan. Over a pot of coffee, Evelyn recounted her discovery, showing Joan the diary. The older woman whistled, visibly impressed. "If that chest is from the Civil War, you might have something of serious historical value. People round here always rumored the Renshaw family was tight with the Union cause. Some said they helped runaway slaves, could have even been part of the Underground Railroad. The house is old enough, that's for sure. Evelyn's mind reeled. Part of her was excited, imagine holding documents or letters that might reshape local history, but another part worried about stirring trouble. Once the government or collectors got wind of it, she could be overwhelmed with legalities, claims, demands. Joan offered a suggestion. Contact the County Historical Society. Quietly, they might help you open it properly, preserve what's inside, and if it's truly valuable, they can guide you on what to do next. That sounded like a plan. Evelyn didn't want to pry open the chest herself and risk damaging something. She also feared setting off a chain reaction where she'd lose control. If it was historically significant, it belonged at least partly to everyone. But she also felt a curious sense of possession. She'd bought this land, found this chest, labored in this creaky house. Did that make it hers alone, or a shared heritage later that day? Evelyn placed a discreet phone call to the Renshaw County Historical Society. The voice on the other end belonged to Edna Lawson, a retired school teacher who served as the society's volunteer coordinator. Her tone jumped from polite interest to palpable excitement when Evelyn mentioned a possible Civil War-era chest. "I can come by tomorrow with a colleague to assess it," Edna offered. Evelyn agreed, adding a request for confidentiality. Edna assured her that the society valued privacy when dealing with delicate finds. That same afternoon, while waiting for Edna's visit, Evelyn decided to further explore the property's perimeter. She wanted to see if there were any other hidden entrances or peculiar spots. She walked for nearly an hour, crossing patches of wild grass and stepping through an overgrown orchard. The apple trees, though unkempt, still bore a few small, misshapen fruits. It must have been a working orchard once, she thought, imagining families harvesting apples for pies and cider decades earlier. Near the far southern edge of the property, she stumbled upon a crumbling stone marker. Kneeling, she brushed off the moss. Faintly, she deciphered the inscription, Renshaw Family Cemetery. It was shocking to find a private burial plot right there among the weeds. Several small headstones leaned precariously, some with dates from the 1800s. She counted at least 6 graves. One read Thomas Renshaw, 1837-1863, fallen in the Union cause. Another, heartbreakingly small, just said Baby Renshaw, 1862. A pang of sadness hit Evelyn. This land held more than just buildings and boxes. It held generations of personal stories, joys, sorrows, tragedies. At dusk, she gathered Abigail and Thomas to watch the sunset over the fields. Despite the farm's neglected state, the sight of golden lights stretching across the horizon was breathtaking. The children asked about the orchard and whether they could pick the apples. Evelyn nodded. "Maybe tomorrow we'll take a basket out there," she said, hoping to instill a sense of wonder in them. She wanted them to feel connected to nature and history, not just the gloom of a run-down house. Night settled in. The kids fell asleep early, worn out from exploring. Evelyn busied herself trying to patch a leak in the roof above the kitchen. A local handyman had told her it would cost several $1,000s to properly fix. She only had a fraction of that left. As she climbed down from the ladder, she felt a wave of exhaustion. Owning a farm was a gargantuan responsibility, more than she'd ever anticipated. But that chest in the ground, it felt like a guiding hand from the Patem urging her forward. If it truly linked to Lincoln or Pinkerton, maybe it would open doors. Perhaps there were grants or funds available for preserving a Civil War site. She clung to that sliver of hope, letting it drown out her mounting worries about money. For once, the old house's mysteries felt like allies rather than burdens. The next morning, Edna Lawson arrived in an aging sedan, accompanied by Professor Randall Cooper, a retired historian from a nearby college. Randall was tall, with white hair combed neatly, and he carried a leather satchel brimming with archival tools. After a cordial introduction, Evelyn led them behind the shed to the trapdoor. The professor whistled quietly. "This is quite the secret hideaway," he remarked. They descended carefully, lanterns in hand, into the damp chamber. Edna's eyes glimmered in the flickering light as she surveyed the barrels and crates. When Randall's lantern beam illuminated the iron-bound chest, his normally reserved demeanor gave way to excitement. Remarkable. The craftsmanship alone suggests mid-19th century, might even be older, he murmured. He circled the chest, examining its hinges, noting the clasp's design. If this truly dates to the Civil War, it could be a significant find for Renshaw County's historical record. Evelyn stood aside as they laid out a small toolkit. They gently tested the lock, which was heavily corroded. Edna snapped photos with an old digital camera. She explained that the Historical Society maintained an inventory of artifacts from local families, but nothing of this scale. The presence of Renshaw hammered into the iron indicated it was undoubtedly linked to the property's original owners. Your diary references from 1943 might tie neatly with this, Edna said. The family must have known it existed for generations. With Evelyn's permission, they attempted to pick the lock, wanting to avoid damaging the chest. After several minutes of delicate maneuvering, there was a soft click. Randall glanced at Edna, then at Evelyn, his face solemn. Shall we open it? Evelyn inhaled. Yes, let's see what's inside. Carefully, he lifted the lid. The musty smell of centuries-old air rushed out, and dust motes danced in their lantern light. Inside, folded sheets of parchment stacked neatly, along with a slim ledger bound in cracking leather. A small cloth pouch sat in one corner. Edna lifted the top parchment, her hands trembling slightly. She let out a soft gasp. It's a letter dated 1863 addressed to a Mr. Thomas Renshaw. And the signature, oh my goodness, it appears to be from a Lincoln. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. She stared, half disbelieving, as Edna read it aloud in reverent tones. To our loyal confidant, Mr. Renshaw, your assistance in the matter of safe passage for those seeking liberty is invaluable. It was undeniable. This was a letter from President Abraham Lincoln himself, expressing gratitude to the Renshaw family for aiding in the cause of the Union. They all exchanged glances, stunned. Professor Cooper turned the ledger's brittle pages, noticing entries about supplies, coded names possibly escaped slaves traveling through. This farm might have been part of the Underground Railroad. He breathed, eyes gleaming. The chest held more letters, some referencing Pinkerton agents operating covertly. Each discovery layered significance upon the last. Evelyn felt a sensation akin to awe. This was real, not a fable. She owned a piece of living history. Edna gently closed the ledger. This is an extraordinary piece of our nation's past. Evelyn, you may have single-handedly uncovered a vital link to local Civil War history. The weight of that statement settled on them, lingering in the damp air. None of them fully knew what it might mean for the farm's future. But one thing was clear, the Renshaw farmstead was no longer just an old fixer-upper. It was a historical treasure, poised to rewrite the county's narrative. Word spread faster than Evelyn expected. Within days, local whispers gave way to quiet excitement. That new widow found old Civil War letters from Lincoln. People began stopping by the farm neighbors offering to help with chores. Curious onlookers peering over the fence. Members of the Historical Society wanting updates. It felt overwhelming. Evelyn tried to keep a semblance of normal life for her children. She still had to fix the roof, haul out garbage, feed them breakfast and dinner. Meanwhile, the phone rang incessantly with inquiries. A small local newspaper reporter even asked for an interview. Joan Henderson dropped by with a plate of homemade biscuits. I hear half the county's abuzz about your find, she said, setting the biscuits on the kitchen table. That's wonderful. But it can also be a headache. Folks might start having opinions on what you should do. Evelyn sighed, taking a biscuit. I'm happy the community is excited. It's just, I'm not sure how to handle it all. I'm no historian. I can't preserve these letters by myself. She bit into the biscuit, grateful for the taste of warm bread. And financially, I can barely fix this place up as it is. Joan nodded sympathetically. The county might pitch in, especially if the site becomes recognized as historically significant. Grants or donations could help. But you'll need advice from someone who understands these processes. Maybe an attorney or a museum curator? She was right. Evelyn realized she had to protect the artifacts from potential damage or claims. The letter from Lincoln alone could attract collectors from across the country. Not all of them honest. That afternoon, Evelyn decided to store the chest and its contents in a safer part of the farmhouse. She cleared out a small closet on the ground floor, lined it with a plastic tarp, and placed a lock on the door. Edna and Randall helped her carefully move the items, each piece wrapped in acid-free paper. They'd found a few more letters referencing Pinkerton's agents, making cryptic allusions to safe houses across Kansas. Edna believed it was definitive proof that the Renshaw family had operated a secret station on the Underground Railroad, funding escaped slaves toward freedom, while also supporting the Union's intelligence efforts. The children were a mix of curious and bewildered. Abigail kept asking, "Who's Lincoln?" "He's on the penny." "Right." Evelyn smiled, giving them a simple explanation of the Civil War and President Lincoln's role in ending slavery. Thomas liked the spy aspect, imagining the Renshaws as heroes with secret tunnels. The best part, for them, was that the orchard was still open for exploration. They spent hours playing hide-and-seek among the trees, only occasionally glancing at the grown-ups' hushed conversations about old papers and historical significance. Night fell, and Evelyn sat on the front porch, looking at the stars. She thought of Michael and how astonished he would be at this turn of events. A farm once considered a worthless ruin now held documents that could fill textbooks. Her mind raced with possibilities, turning the house into a small museum, attracting tourists, or possibly having the government declare it a heritage site. But with each idea came concerns: privacy, finances, the children's well-being. She wrapped her arms around herself, uncertain but also oddly at peace. Perhaps the farm was giving her a new purpose. If so, she would do her best to rise to the occasion. The following weekend, Professor Cooper arranged for a small team of historians to visit for a preliminary evaluation. They arrived in cars filled with archival boxes, cameras, and protective gloves. Among them was Dr. Patricia Morgan, a specialist in Civil War studies from the State University. She was in her early 50s, dressed in practical khaki pants, and her enthusiasm practically radiated. "I can't believe we might have direct Lincoln correspondences here," she said, shaking Evelyn's hand. "It's the discovery of a lifetime." Evelyn watched as the experts methodically cataloged each letter and ledger page, speaking in hushed, excited tones. Dr. Morgan placed a magnifying glass over Lincoln's signature, comparing strokes to known samples. The penmanship matches documented letters from 1863, and the context lines up with his pushes for the Emancipation Proclamation. "I think it's authentic," she affirmed, eyes shining. Evelyn felt a rush of pride and relief. Part of her had worried it might be a hoax, though she couldn't imagine who would go to such lengths. While the experts worked, Evelyn took the kids outside to avoid interrupting. They made a makeshift picnic in the orchard, sitting on a blanket under gnarled apple trees. Abigail munched on a slightly tart apple, wrinkling her nose but still enjoying the novelty. Thomas threw fallen apples for an imaginary dog he pretended was chasing them. Evelyn gazed at the house, noticing the group of historians busy at the windows. It felt surreal, like her personal life had merged with a national narrative. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the late autumn sun warm her face. After a few hours, Dr. Morgan and Professor Cooper emerged, smiling. They explained that the documents were stable for now, but would require professional preservation, soon deacidification, humidity control, that sort of thing. They recommended contacting the State Archive or a reputable private conservator. "The historical significance is immense," Morgan said. "We're talking about letters that directly tie this farm to major events in the Civil War, possibly the Underground Railroad, and intelligence operations involving Pinkerton. This will garner national interest." The notion of national interest made Evelyn's stomach clench. She was still behind on bills, the roof still leaked, and the farm wasn't exactly tourist-ready. She worried about crowds, media coverage, and losing autonomy over her home. Sensing her anxiety, Professor Cooper placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this. We'll do what we can to guide you. And the local historical society has resources to help with legal or financial matters related to historic preservation. But ultimately, it's your decision how far you want this to go. As they packed up, Dr. Morgan mentioned that she would be writing a brief paper on the find, possibly presenting it at a state historical conference. Evelyn swallowed hard, imagining throngs of academics descending on her doorstep. She forced a polite smile. I appreciate all the help, she managed. That night, she lay awake, torn between excitement and apprehension. Were these letters a blessing or a burden? Would they lead to opportunities that could fix her financial woes, or upheavals that threatened her children's peace? She didn't have answers yet, only a growing sense that life at Renshaw Farmstead was about to change drastically. In an attempt to balance the whirlwind inside the farmhouse, Evelyn focused on what she could control: daily chores, minor repairs, and the children's routine. Each morning, she woke at dawn, made breakfast, oatmeal or scrambled eggs, and saw Abigail and Thomas off to the school bus that now stopped at the end of the long gravel driveway. The kids were adjusting surprisingly well. They enjoyed the open space, and in school, they had plenty of stories about finding treasure in the yard. By mid-morning, Evelyn faced the never-ending to-do list: patching holes in the barn roof, repairing fence posts, scrubbing moldy corners inside the house. The feeling of physically making something better, even in small increments, steadied her nerves. She hammered nails into a loose board on the front porch, recalling that not long ago she was waitressing double shifts just to survive. Now she hammered nails into a home that was hers despite its flaws. It felt oddly empowering. Joan Henderson often stopped by to chat or drop off groceries. She was becoming a dear friend, providing moral support and practical know-how. One cloudy afternoon, Joan helped Evelyn haul an ancient water pump from the barn, discussing the possibility of raising chickens or goats for extra income. I did it back in my day, Joan said, and a few animals won't break your back if you manage them right. Evelyn liked the idea of making the farm functional again, though she worried about initial costs and daily labor. Baby steps, she told herself. Meanwhile, the county's interest in the Lincoln letters continued to grow. Edna Lawson proposed a small exhibit in the local library, featuring reproductions of the documents and a talk from Professor Cooper. Edna assured Evelyn that the originals would remain safely stored at the farm until a suitable archival facility was arranged. Evelyn tentatively agreed, hoping a modest exhibit would satisfy local curiosity and prevent random visitors from overwhelming her property. One morning, she ventured into the orchard with a rake, determined to clear fallen branches and rotten apples. Abigail and Thomas joined, bounding through the leaves. That's when she spotted the faint outline of a stone path hidden under years of debris. Intrigued, she cleared away the leaves, revealing old stones that led deeper into the orchard. Following the path, she reached a quaint gazebo overrun by ivy. The wooden structure was partially collapsed, but she recognized its former beauty. Inside, a small bench and table lay warped by weather. Carved into the bench was a heart shape with initials T.R. plus E. 1862. Evelyn felt a stab of emotion. Some young couple had once courted there during the Civil War era. She imagined stolen kisses, whispered promises of a future that was uncertain in wartime. Abigail tugged on her sleeve. Mom, can we fix this up? It could be our secret place. Evelyn laughed softly, ruffling her daughter's hair. We'll try. Sweetie, there's a lot to fix around here, but maybe someday. In that moment, seeing the orchard's hidden path and the children's eager faces, she realized how the farm was weaving itself into their lives. Yes, it was old, riddled with challenges, but also brimming with new beginnings. The orchard, the gazebo. The orchard's quiet corners, they were becoming part of the family's story. And hidden within the farm's every nook was a reminder of those who came before, forging hope in the face of history's darkest hours. The day of the library exhibit arrived, and Evelyn felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nerves. Professor Cooper had helped create high-resolution scans of several key letters, including the one from Lincoln. Alongside them, Morgan added notes about Pinkerton and the network of clandestine stations believed to be scattered throughout Kansas. The exhibit was modest, just one glass display case and a series of poster boards, but it was enough to draw a crowd of curious locals. Evelyn dressed Abigail and Thomas in their Sunday best, wanting them to witness this moment. They walked into the small library, greeted by excited chatter. Edna Lawson stood near the entrance, beaming. "Come in, come in. We're just about to start." Joan Henderson waved from across the room. It felt comforting to see familiar faces in the sea of visitors. There were also unfamiliar ones, elderly couples, high school students, local reporters, even a councilman. Professor Cooper spoke first, outlining the historical context of 1863, the Civil War raging, President Lincoln's push for emancipation, and the precarious role of clandestine operatives like Allan Pinkerton. Then Dr. Morgan explained how Renshaw Farmstead fit into this tapestry. Based on the ledger and letters found by Ms. Brooks, it appears that Thomas Renshaw assisted fleeing slaves, provided intelligence about Confederate movements, and liaised with Pinkerton's agents. President Lincoln's letter acknowledges that invaluable support. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. A ripple of awe spread through the small audience. When Evelyn stepped up, her cheeks burned. Public speaking wasn't her forte. She took a steadying breath and began, "I'm just a mother who bought an old farm, hoping to provide a home for my kids. I never expected to uncover a piece of our nation's history. I feel both honored and overwhelmed." She glanced down at Abigail and Thomas, who smiled proudly at her. "I'm grateful that the community has rallied around us. My hope is that we continue to preserve these documents responsibly, so future generations can learn from them." After her brief remarks, applause filled the room. People came up to shake her hand, congratulate her, and share their own family stories about the Civil War. An older gentleman, tears in his eyes, said his great-grandfather was a runaway slave who found refuge in Kansas. "Thank you for shining a light on this," he said, voice trembling. "It's important we remember the bravery of those who risked everything for freedom." Evelyn struggled not to cry. She felt the profound significance of what she'd inadvertently stepped into. No longer was it just a farm's dusty secrets. It was a bridge connecting past courage to present-day understanding. As she guided her children around the exhibit, she realized how their lives had forever changed. They were part of something bigger, carrying on a legacy of hope in a place once overshadowed by disrepair. That night, as they drove home, the headlights illuminating the gravel road to the farmhouse, Evelyn felt a surge of determination. She might be a widow, and the farm might need more work than she had funds for, but they were forging a new path. The Renshaw letters had awakened not just history, but also her own sense of purpose. In the weeks that followed, the farm bustled with a new kind of energy. Local carpenters, curious about the historic discovery, offered reduced rates to help with urgent repairs. Joan introduced Evelyn to a small network of volunteers who specialized in restoring old buildings. They tackled the barn's roof first, patching it enough to prevent further collapse. A group of retired farmers showed up to help mend the fences, exchanging stories about the area's heyday. The orchard, once a tangled mess, was gradually cleared of dead branches. It became a place where children could safely romp and where Evelyn envisioned planting fresh seedlings come spring. Financially, she was still tight. Despite the volunteer labor, materials cost money, and groceries didn't pay for themselves. The modest life insurance fund was nearly gone. One afternoon, however, Edna Lawson arrived with surprising news. The Historical Society, along with a local philanthropic group, had raised money to help with the preservation of the house, specifically to protect the Civil War documents. "It's not a fortune," Edna admitted, handing Evelyn a check with trembling excitement, "but it should help patch your roof properly and install basic climate control in a safe room for the letters. We don't want them deteriorating in the damp." Evelyn's eyes welled up, touched by the kindness. She never imagined strangers would rally around her family like this. More than once, she caught herself thinking that Michael, wherever he was, must be smiling at how a neglected farm had sparked such community spirit. She accepted the check with gratitude, promising to use the funds wisely. If she could secure the letters, protect them from humidity, maybe the farm could serve as a small museum or educational site. The Renshaw legacy deserved to be shared, not locked away in a private collection. Meanwhile, the children thrived in their new environment. Abigail brought home drawings from school depicting the orchard and barn, labeling them our historic farm. Thomas showed a keen interest in old tools, asking if he could learn to fix things. With guidance from some local handymen, he practiced small tasks like hammering nails into a spare piece of wood or drilling a hole with supervision. "He's a natural," one of the volunteers noted with a grin. Evelyn felt her heart swell with pride, seeing her son so engaged, her daughter so inspired. Yet amid the goodwill, a shadow loomed. She'd started receiving letters, some from out-of-state collectors, offering to buy the Lincoln documents for staggering sums. Others came from individuals claiming to be distant relatives of the Renshaw family, demanding the letters be turned over. It was unsettling. Evelyn showed these to Joan, who recommended seeking legal advice. There was also talk among certain county officials about eminent domain if the site was declared a major historical landmark. That concept sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. She'd just established a home here. The idea of losing it to government acquisition was terrifying. Still, she tried to focus on the present tasks. Each evening, after a full day of labor, she shared dinner with her children in the newly painted kitchen. They might eat on paper plates due to limited dishware, but it felt like home, a real home. The house was no longer eerily silent. It echoed with conversation, laughter, and plans for the future. On the table, an old photograph of Anna Renshaw sat propped against a salt shaker, her 1940s diary nearby. Evelyn liked to think Anna would be pleased seeing the farm come alive again, bridging decades in a tapestry of resilience. As winter's chill deepened, the farmhouse's transformation progressed. A professional roofer arrived to lay new shingles, courtesy of the donated funds. Evelyn marveled at the difference it made: no more persistent leaks, no more buckets catching drips in the hallway. Insulation was another priority. Volunteers blew new insulation into the attic, drastically improving the warmth. At last, they could rely on a small heater without losing heat through every crack. Abigail, in her childlike optimism, declared that now they could decorate for Christmas properly. And decorate they did. Joan donated an old artificial Christmas tree, which Evelyn and the children set up in the living room, now partially cleared of boxes. They draped it with homemade garlands of popcorn and cranberries, along with second-hand ornaments from a thrift store. Each evening, the family gathered around the tree, reading stories by lamplight. Occasionally, Evelyn read them short excerpts from Anna's diary or a passage from the Lincoln letters deemed suitable for young ears. She wanted them to appreciate the significance of the place they called home, while still preserving their innocence. An unexpected visitor arrived one afternoon: Rosemary Brooks, Evelyn's mother-in-law. She and Evelyn hadn't spoken much after Michael's funeral. Tensions over medical bills and burial costs had strained their relationship. But now, the older woman stepped out of a borrowed car, looking hesitant but determined. "I heard about your discovery," she said softly, eyeing the farmhouse, "and I realized I never reached out. How are you managing?" There was an awkward moment as Evelyn weighed old resentments against the realization that family ties still mattered. She sighed, motioning Rosemary inside. They shared cups of herbal tea in the kitchen, discussing the children's progress in school, the farm's restoration, and Michael's memory. Rosemary teared up at the mention of her son, regretting their estrangement. "I'm proud you're taking charge here, dear," she said, glancing at the new roof with genuine approval. Michael would be proud too. As a gesture of reconciliation, Rosemary offered a small monetary gift. "Use it for the kids, or for the farm's museum corner, whatever you need." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. She accepted, quietly thanking her mother-in-law for bridging the gap. Later that evening, Rosemary joined them for dinner, simple cornbread and chili, sharing stories about Michael's childhood, making the kids giggle at tales of their dad's mischievous pranks. The house felt warmer, not just from the new insulation, but from the healing of old wounds. By the time night settled in, Evelyn walked the property alone, footprints crunching in the thin layer of snow that dusted the fields. She gazed at the stars and marveled at how different her life had become since that fateful auction. The hidden chest, the orchard's gazebo, the orchard's path, and the letters from Lincoln and Pinkerton's circle had fused into a tapestry of history and hope. She thought about the Civil War era, about Anna Renshaw in the 1940s, and now about herself, a widow forging a new path. Different times, yet the same farm, united by perseverance and dreams of a better future. Evelyn paused near the orchard, observing the shadows cast by moonlight. Overhead, an owl hooted softly. She whispered to the darkness, "Thank you," unsure if she was addressing the Renshaw ancestors or the land itself, perhaps all three. In that moment, she felt a profound peace, as though the farm recognized her as its caretaker. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, legal complexities, financial decisions, parental responsibilities, but she felt ready. The house, the orchard, and the legacy of the Renshaw farmstead had found a champion in Evelyn Brooks, and in turn, she'd found a deeper purpose than she ever imagined. Snow continued to blanket Renshaw farmstead in soft layers as January arrived, transforming the orchard into a shimmering landscape of barren tree limbs and white drifts. Evelyn Brooks watched from the newly weatherproofed living room window, sipping on a mug of tea. Despite the cold, her spirits remained unusually high. She felt that, beneath the quiet hush of winter, the farm pulsed with the promise of spring. After the whirlwind of discovering Abraham Lincoln's letters and clandestine documents in the hidden chest, life had settled into a delicate balance. Her day-to-day tasks involved child-rearing, minor farm chores, and managing the historical treasure that drew more attention each week. With the roof and insulation upgraded, the farmhouse felt cozier. The children, Abigail and Thomas, had grown accustomed to the squeaks of the old floorboards, the howling winter winds, and the daily presence of neighbors turned friends dropping by with small gifts or offers of assistance. Even her mother-in-law, Rosemary, had extended her stay, sleeping on a fold-out cot in one of the refurbished upstairs bedrooms. The extra set of adult hands helped Evelyn immensely, especially in the mornings, when she juggled packing school lunches, scraping ice off the truck windshield, and preparing for whichever historian or official might call that day. The county's new wave of interest in the farm led to further developments. A local television station requested an on-site interview, eager to showcase the Civil War documents and highlight the philanthropic efforts that revived the property. Initially, Evelyn was wary she didn't crave fame, and she feared exposing her children to invasive questions. But after some deliberation with Joan Henderson and Professor Cooper, she decided a controlled interview might actually help keep the narrative accurate and discourage rumor mongers. A short broadcast, handled responsibly, could spark positive engagement, more funding for preservation, and possibly even tourism that might bring revenue to Renshaw County. Joan helped arrange the interview. On a bright, crisp morning, a news van rumbled up the driveway. Two journalists emerged, politely shaking Evelyn's hand. They filmed segments around the orchard, capturing footage of the old gazebo, the repaired barn, and a glimpse of the orchard path where kids sometimes raced on sleds. Then they set up in the living room to record a short conversation. Evelyn spoke simply and honestly about the farm's significance. "I'm still learning every day," she confessed, hands folded in her lap. "But I see it as my duty now to keep this place alive so people can remember how ordinary folk played crucial roles in shaping our country's history." Thomas peeked from behind the camera, fascinated by the blinking red light. Abigail, a bit shyer, clung to Joan's side. The reporters concluded the segment, promising a respectful edit. When they left, Evelyn breathed a sigh of relief. She hoped her words would be received in the spirit they were given. That night, she quietly mulled over how fast everything was changing. Not long ago, her greatest worry was where to sleep safely with her children. Now, she was a reluctant guardian of national relics. Part of her wondered if life would ever feel simple again. But as she closed the front door against the cold and glimpsed the living room glowing with lamplight, she realized she wouldn't trade this place for anything. It was hers, and the children's, and it held meaning beyond what she could have imagined. A few days after the TV interview aired, Evelyn started receiving a different kind of correspondence. Mixed among the usual letters, local holiday greetings, utility bills, and offers from the Historical Society were envelopes from out-of-state addresses with official-looking seals. One bore the insignia of a Washington, D.C. law firm. Inside was a brief note introducing themselves as legal representatives of the Randolph-Renshaw family line, claiming a distant genealogical link and requesting a meeting to discuss estate matters. Another letter arrived from a man in Florida, also professing Renshaw ancestry, writing in a more personal tone. He congratulated Evelyn on her find, but hinted that blood ties entitled him to a share of whatever valuables were discovered. The swirl of these letters triggered a nagging sense of worry. Had the publicity awakened distant relatives who now smelled opportunity? She sought counsel from Joan, who sighed in annoyance. It's not uncommon when big historical finds surface. People come out of the woodwork, some genuine, some frauds. Get a local attorney's advice before you respond to any of them. Evelyn agreed. She decided to set aside the letters for the moment and focus on her own legal security. If there truly were legitimate heirs, she wanted to handle it ethically, but she also had no intention of rolling over for con artists. While this simmered in the background, the children sensed their mother's tension. Abigail asked during dinner if strangers would come take our house. Evelyn forced a gentle smile. No, honey, I won't let that happen. We have friends and the law on our side. She realized how quickly her daughter had picked up on the possibility of losing everything again. That single fear jolted Evelyn into action. She called a local attorney, a sharp but kind-hearted woman named Darlene Foster, who had volunteered with the Historical Society. Darlene agreed to meet and review the letters. At their appointment, Darlene leafed through the claims. Some of these genealogical lines are so distant, the courts would likely dismiss them. But we do need to handle it carefully. If there's a legitimate claimant, you can't just ignore them. She tapped at a pen on her notepad. More pressing, though, is the status of the documents. They may be considered part of the property you purchased, or they may be seen as separate ancestral assets. Precedents vary from state to state. Evelyn's heart sank, imagining complex legal battles. Darlene offered a reassuring smile. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. The good news is you've acted transparently. That weighs in your favor. Evelyn left the attorney's office feeling a heady mixture of relief and trepidation. She thought of Anna Renshaw's diaries and how the family line seemed to vanish in the mid-20th century. Where had these Randolph Renshaws been all this time? Had they contributed anything to preserving the farm? Or were they appearing now just because it was worth something? That evening, she reread Lincoln's letter, focusing on his closing lines in unity. We preserve the light of liberty. Unity, she mused. That was the key. She hoped she'd find a path to keep the farm's integrity intact without losing her own sense of security. If Randolph Renshaw was a legitimate heir, maybe they could work together. But Evelyn also prepared for the possibility that some people only wanted the farm's newfound fame and fortune. Amid these legal uncertainties, the day-to-day rhythms of winter persisted. Evelyn stacked firewood near the side door, carefully wrapping a tarp to keep it dry. Rosemary helped keep the children entertained with puzzles and board games, occasionally taking them outside to sculpt snowmen when weather allowed. The orchard stood silent, its branches etched against gray skies, while the barn offered refuge for a few stray cats that appeared seeking warmth. Life had become a curious blend of homestead simplicity and high-stakes historical guardianship. One frigid afternoon, Professor Randall Cooper telephoned. Evelyn, I've received inquiries from a major university press. They're interested in publishing a scholarly volume on the Renshaw farmstead letters. They'd like you on board as a co-author, given your unique role in this discovery. Evelyn gripped the phone, half excited, half intimidated. Co-authoring a historical book. It sounded incredible but also daunting. She didn't feel academically qualified. Randall seemed to sense her hesitation. Don't worry. You'd be contributing your first-hand experience and perspective. The press wants authenticity. They'll handle the heavy research. Think of it as an opportunity to share your story and possibly earn some royalties. The idea lingered in her thoughts. A publication could secure funds for further restoration and might reinforce her rightful stewardship of the documents. Later that night, she mentioned it to Joan, who chuckled at Evelyn's wide-eyed expression. "You're forging a new legacy here," Joan said, ladling homemade soup into bowls for dinner. "Why shouldn't you be part of the official record?" It felt surreal but also oddly fitting. Evelyn resolved to speak more with Randall to see if this arrangement made sense. She owed it to the farm and to all the Renshaws who came before to tell their story accurately. Meanwhile, Dr. Patricia Morgan planned a second visit, hoping to conduct a deeper examination of the Pinkerton references. She believed some coded letters might reveal details about escape routes or hidden safe houses. If these turned out to be verifiable, they'd reshape the local narrative around abolitionist efforts. Word had trickled down to the National Park Service as well, which sometimes managed Underground Railroad historical sites. The possibility of federally recognized status loomed, something that made Evelyn both proud and apprehensive. When Dr. Morgan arrived, she brought a specialized scanning device to capture high-resolution images of the more fragile documents. Evelyn, Joan, and a couple of volunteers watched in fascination as Dr. Morgan's team carefully turned each page, scanning them under controlled light to avoid damage. "We might pick up faint watermarks or pen pressure marks that reveal hidden codes," Dr. Morgan explained, adjusting the device's settings. Occasionally, she murmured in excitement when a certain line suggested clandestine instructions for sending messages or moving people under cover of night. Evelyn felt history unfolding right there in her parlor. The hush in the room, interrupted only by the soft hum of equipment, reminded her of a library more than a home. It struck her that Renshaw Farmstead had evolved into a sort of living archive, a place where the past and present mingled. By the time Dr. Morgan finished, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the snow in hues of lavender. Thomas and Abigail peered in from the hallway, impatient for dinner. Dr. Morgan took a moment to reassure them she wasn't a scary scientist, offering a warm smile and promising, "Maybe someday, you two can read these letters in school textbooks." Evelyn felt a rush of hope for that future, imagining her children flipping through pages of a published account of what their mother had discovered in a dusty underground chamber. February brought an unexpected thaw, causing the snow to melt into slush and revealing patches of frozen mud around the property. With the mild weather, Evelyn ventured to check on the orchard again, noticing new tree damage from the winter storms. As she walked among the quiet rows, memories of the orchard's summer potential flashed in her mind: sun-warmed apples, the earthy scent of orchard grass, children's laughter. She made a mental note to research pruning techniques in orchard management so that in the coming spring, she could restore at least a portion of the trees to productivity. Maybe, just maybe, she could sell apples or cider in the fall, further supporting the farm's upkeep. Life at the farmhouse hummed along with a sense of cautious optimism. There were still plenty of bills, plenty of concerns, but also tangible steps toward a stable future. The Historical Society had organized a small restoration fair, inviting craftspeople and donors to see the property. Evelyn prepped the barn as best she could, sweeping away hay debris, setting up a makeshift display of the orchard's history and some diaries from Anna Renshaw's era. Even the children got involved, drawing pictures that labeled "before restoration" and "after restoration" in bright crayons. The event attracted around 50 people, some local, some from neighboring counties. Tables were arranged with pamphlets about Civil War history and Underground Railroad routes. Joan and a few volunteers served hot cider, while Dr. Morgan gave a short talk about the significance of Pinkerton's infiltration of Confederate circles. Evelyn mingled shyly, grateful for the visitors' interest, but also wary of the occasional over-enthusiastic question, like one gentleman who insisted on seeing the exact spot where Lincoln's letters had been unearthed. A stirring highlight was when an elderly couple approached. The wife, leaning on a cane, introduced herself as Helen Jacobs, claiming her grandfather had found refuge at a safe house near Renshaw County. With tears in her eyes, she thanked Evelyn for bringing these stories to light. "It means a lot to us," Helen said, voice quivering. "People forget how dangerous it was to help slaves escape. Their bravery should never be forgotten." Evelyn couldn't help but tear up as well, hugging Helen gently. She felt the farm's legacy weaving into people's personal narratives, knitting a thread of compassion across generations. Not everyone was so friendly, though. A man in a pressed suit hovered at the edges of the fair, reluctant to engage. He scribbled notes on a small pad, occasionally shooting calculating glances at Evelyn. When she tried to approach, he slipped away, blending into the crowd. Later, Joan mentioned spotting him near the orchard, peering at the orchard's boundary lines. Probably a developer or one of those out-of-town lawyers, Joan muttered. Keep an eye on him. A chill prickled along Evelyn's neck. She remembered Darlene Foster's warning. With increased interest came increased scrutiny. There was little she could do besides remain vigilant and trust that the farm's supporters outweighed any opportunists. For now, she would focus on forging a future. If trouble came knocking, she would face it head-on, just as she'd faced every challenge since moving here. A few days after the restoration fair, a formal letter arrived from the Randolph Renshaw legal team, requesting a meeting to discuss mutual interests in the Renshaw estate. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she read the precise legal language. Darlene Foster advised caution, but also noted that ignoring them entirely wasn't wise. If they have any legitimate claim, Darlene said, we should find out sooner rather than later. Otherwise, it could escalate into a lawsuit. After some back and forth, Evelyn agreed to a meeting on neutral ground Darlene's law office in the nearby town center. On the scheduled day, Evelyn dressed in her best jeans and a modest blouse, wanting to appear neither confrontational nor submissive. She arrived early, feeling a jittery nervousness swirling in her stomach. Darlene greeted her warmly and set them up in a small conference room with sunlight streaming through large windows. Moments later, two men and a woman entered. One man was youngish, maybe mid-30s, with an expensive-looking haircut, while the other had salt and pepper hair and a steely gaze. The woman appeared to be their legal counsel, carrying a sleek briefcase. Introductions were brisk. The older man was Richard Randolph, claiming direct descent from a Renshaw cousin who had migrated east generations ago. What followed was a tense discussion. Randolph's lawyer presented a genealogical chart, tracing his lineage back to the mid-19th century. Evelyn couldn't verify its authenticity on the spot, but it looked detailed and possibly genuine. Randolph claimed that any historical artifacts found on the farm, particularly those of significant monetary value, should be equitably shared among heirs. Evelyn felt her blood pressure rise. She tried to keep her voice calm as she explained her position. I purchased the property legally, which includes all fixtures and contents. Plus, these documents are historically important, not just commodities. Randolph's tone grew clipped. That might be so, Miss Brooks, but certain legal precedents grant extended family rights to lineage-related items, especially if they have direct familial or cultural significance. Darlene intervened, citing Kansas property laws that generally favor the landowner. The conversation looped back and forth, with the Randolph side hinting at possible litigation if they weren't granted co-stewardship. Evelyn clenched her hands under the table. She despised the idea that someone with no apparent attachment to the farm's upkeep could swoop in and claim partial ownership. Eventually, Darlene suggested a compromise: the Renshaw documents would remain on site, with official recognition of the Randolph family's historical tie. If they wanted to view or study the documents, they could do so by appointment. Any revenues from museum exhibits or publications would primarily go to preservation, with a modest percentage set aside for potential claims. Randolph didn't look fully satisfied, but he offered a curt nod. We'll review the proposal, his lawyer said, snapping her briefcase shut. After they left, Evelyn slumped in her chair, tension laced through her muscles. That was exhausting, she admitted. Darlene placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They're fishing for profit, but they're not entirely baseless. We'll refine the agreement, set legal boundaries, and see if they accept. If not, we'll fight them in court if we must. Driving home, Evelyn mulled over how quickly joy and wonder could turn into property disputes. She refused to let that overshadow the farm's essence, but she also recognized the reality: once something becomes valuable, the world tries to claim it in pieces. That night, snow returned with a vengeance, draping the farm in a silent white cloak. Despite her lingering anxiety, Evelyn felt a strange comfort in the hush of a new snowfall. After tucking the children into bed, she sat at the kitchen table, reviewing her handwritten notes from the meeting with the Randolph Renshaw team. She'd always been more of a hands-on problem solver, not one for legal battles or genealogical labyrinths. But here she was, drawn into a conflict spanning centuries of Renshaw lineage. Suddenly, she heard a soft knock at the door. Glancing at the clock, it was nearly 9 p.m. She wondered who could be visiting at this hour. When she opened the door, Professor Cooper stood on the porch, bundled in a thick coat. His face wore a solemn expression. "I apologize for the late call," he said quietly, "but I've discovered something in one of the Pinkerton documents that you need to see." She ushered him inside, offering hot tea to warm up. He pulled a small folder from his satchel. "We've been deciphering bits of code," he explained, flipping pages covered in annotated scribbles. Some references pointed to a second, hidden repository beyond the chest we already found, a location described as the second vault or buried records that Pinkerton's men and the Renshaw family were sworn to protect. It may be bigger than we realized. Evelyn's heart thudded. Another hidden cache. The first chest had brought so much upheaval, both good and bad. What would another trove unleash? She skimmed the coded references, picking out phrases like "beneath the orchard," "old foundation," and "8 paces west of the boundary stone." The orchard boundary stone was that near the family cemetery or further south. Her mind raced, recalling the time she stumbled on a small marker indicating the Renshaw family cemetery. Could there be a secret vault there, Professor Cooper noted? If these references are accurate, we might be looking at a more extensive collection, perhaps larger crates or sealed barrels. The documents mention Pinkerton storing sensitive war records and personal accounts, maybe from enslaved individuals who sought refuge. This could be an even bigger historical find. Evelyn rubbed her temples. It was thrilling, yes, but also terrifying. She pictured more legal tangles with the Randolph crew, greater attention from federal agencies, maybe even a flood of tourists. Yet, overshadowing that was the moral gravity. These records could hold the names of men, women, and children who risked everything for freedom. They deserved acknowledgement. Evelyn looked at Professor Cooper and let out a shaky exhale. "So what do we do? Dig up the orchard in the middle of winter?" He gave a rueful smile. "We might wait until spring thaw, unless we see an urgent reason to rush. The ground's frozen solid, but we should plan carefully. This time, let's have a professional team on hand, with metal detectors or ground-penetrating radar, so we don't damage anything." After the professor left, Evelyn stared at the swirling snow through the window. A second vault, concealed beneath the orchard's silent expanse. She wondered if the orchard itself was complicit in these secrets, patiently guarding them for generations. Something within her stirred a blend of awe and apprehension. The farm was still speaking, still revealing truths. She silently resolved that if the orchard harbored more of the Renshaw story, she'd uncover it with respect. And come what may, she'd stand firm to protect the farm's integrity and her family's newfound haven. The promise of another hidden repository set Evelyn's mind aflame with questions, but she chose caution and patience. With the ground frozen and the orchard blanketed in snow, any immediate dig would be nearly impossible. So, she kept the new discovery under wraps, sharing it only with a small circle: Joan, Darlene, and Dr. Morgan. They all agreed it was best to wait until early spring to confirm the vault's location, limiting rumors that might spur unwanted attention, especially from the Randolph faction. In the interim, Evelyn channeled her energy into learning orchard care. She discovered an old library book, Apple Orchards, a practical guide for family farms, and studied pruning diagrams with rapt focus. Joan teased her, calling her the orchard scientist, but Evelyn found solace in the straightforward, tangible nature of orchard work compared to the complexity of legal disputes and historical revelations. Each evening, she spent a half-hour reading, visualizing which branches to cut and how to encourage new growth. She hoped that by the time snow melted, she'd be ready to restore at least part of the orchard to productivity. Rosemary, her mother-in-law, also showed an unexpected interest in orchard management. The older woman admitted she'd once dreamed of a small homestead lifestyle with her husband growing vegetables, keeping chickens before her career took them to a city. Together, they mapped sections of the orchard, marking which trees looked salvageable. It was a simple bonding activity that seemed to ease the lingering tension between them. Meanwhile, the children continued to flourish at school. Thomas joined a small woodworking club, learning to fashion birdhouses and simple wooden toys. Abigail's teacher praised her detailed farm sketches, awarding her a ribbon in an art contest. Over dinner, the siblings babbled excitedly about how they might turn the orchard into an apple festival spot someday. Their innocent enthusiasm bolstered Evelyn's resolve to keep building this life. Occasionally, she'd catch a glimpse of the orchard from her bedroom window at sunrise. The snow-covered rows seemed endless, silhouettes of gnarled branches against a pale morning sky. In those moments, she almost sensed the presence of old souls moving quietly among the trunks, safeguarding the orchard's hidden vault. She wondered about the men and women who'd once passed through this land seeking freedom, a fleeting pause on a harrowing journey north. Their footsteps must have echoed in these same rows, each tree bearing silent witness. At times, she confided her swirling thoughts to Joan. "I feel this deep responsibility," she admitted. "Like I'm caretaker, not just for the farm, but for all the people whose stories it holds. The orchard, the house, the letters, none of it belongs solely to me." Joan nodded sagely. "That's the burden of history, dear. But it's also the gift. You get to breathe new life into something that's been forgotten." Evelyn found comfort in those words. Yes, it was a burden to face legal threats and genealogical claims, but it was also an honor to stand at this crossroads of past and future. She resolved to do right by the orchard's secrets when the thaw came. She would unearth them with integrity, determined to share whatever truths emerged, no matter how daunting. A steady melt began by mid-March, the snow receding into patchy puddles. The orchard's skeletal branches started showing the tiniest buds, a delicate green pushing through bark that had been dormant for months. Evelyn felt a surge of optimism at the sight. The prospect of new growth mirrored her hopes for the farm itself, renewed life and possibility after so much upheaval. She convened a quiet meeting with Professor Cooper, Dr. Morgan, Joan, and Darlene to plan the orchard excavation. Over steaming mugs of coffee in the farmhouse kitchen, they discussed logistics. Professor Cooper had arranged for a pair of archaeology graduate students to bring a ground-penetrating radar GPR unit, which could help identify subsurface anomalies without extensive digging. Dr. Morgan noted that if the vault turned out to be large or historically significant, they might need to involve state archaeological services to ensure a proper excavation. That could mean additional permits and red tape, but it was better to handle it legally and ethically. Darlene added a layer of caution. If word gets out, the Randolph lawyers might try to halt the dig or demand representation on site. We should keep the circle tight. Evelyn agreed, deciding they'd conduct the initial GPR scan discreetly and reveal the findings only once they knew what they were dealing with. "I don't want to hide anything," Evelyn clarified, "but let's avoid turning this into a circus. If we find something, we'll handle it step by step." A week later, on a brisk, sunny morning, the small team assembled at the orchard's southern perimeter, where the ground was firmer. Professor Cooper's graduate students set up the GPR device, explaining how it emitted radar pulses into the soil and measured reflections to map buried structures or objects. Joan watched in fascination, hands tucked into her jacket pockets. "We've come a long way from dowsing rods," she joked. The students methodically swept the orchard floor, adjusting frequencies and marking spots with small flags whenever the data hinted at something unusual underground. Evelyn's heart thudded each time a student stuck a flag in the soil. Was it old rocks, a root system, or an actual vault? After an hour, they gathered around a laptop to analyze the data. An excited hush fell. The scans showed a rectangular anomaly roughly 6 feet underground, about 10 feet long and several feet wide, near a marker stone at the orchard's edge. Professor Cooper looked stunned. "That shape is too regular to be natural," he said. Dr. Morgan nodded, eyes lighting up with academic fervor. It could be a crate, a small chamber, or some sort of sealed structure. Evelyn felt goosebumps. Could it hold more letters, diaries, or even relics from enslaved families who'd passed through? Joan placed a supportive hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. They decided the next step was to apply for a quick local permit to excavate responsibly. They'd keep a tight lid on the information until they confirmed their find. Dr. Morgan volunteered to handle communication with the State Archaeological Office, emphasizing they wanted to preserve any artifacts according to best practices. As they collected their equipment, Evelyn gazed at the orchard, alive now with the chatter of birds returning for spring. Something lay beneath its roots, a buried piece of history waiting to breathe again. And she was prepared, though anxious, for whatever revelations this new vault might unveil. Word that an archaeological survey had taken place on the orchard leaked out through a neighbor's casual remark at the local post office, and speculation took off faster than anyone anticipated. By the following weekend, Evelyn overheard people in the diner discussing treasure hunts and secret tunnels with wild enthusiasm. She sighed, realizing controlling rumors was a losing game. Darlene Foster advised that the best approach might be a brief, factual statement to the local paper, clarifying that a standard survey was performed and that they were waiting on permits to confirm any findings. Evelyn composed a short note, careful with her wording, and handed it to the newspaper editor. The printed article ran under the headline, "Further Discoveries at Renshaw Farmstead." It stuck mostly to facts, quoting her, "We conducted a preliminary survey in the orchard, seeking to understand the farm's historical significance. Any excavation will follow proper archaeological guidelines." Although it didn't quash gossip entirely, it at least replaced speculation with a measured stance. The Randolph side seized the moment. Of course. A letter from their lawyer arrived, referencing media acknowledgments of further hidden assets and insisting on their right to participate in all future excavations. Darlene penned a polite but firm reply, stating that no official excavation had begun and reiterating Evelyn's sole ownership of the property unless and until courts ruled otherwise. Randolph fired back with thinly veiled threats of injunctions. The volley of legal documents made Evelyn's head spin, but she clung to Darlene's guidance. Despite the tension, a sense of excitement buzzed through the farm. Abigail and Thomas could barely contain their curiosity. "Mom, are we going to dig up dinosaur bones?" Thomas asked one morning, face lit with wonder. Abigail corrected him with mock seriousness. "It's probably not dinosaurs. Silly. But maybe old coins or diaries." Their childlike interpretations were endearing. It reminded Evelyn that, no matter how weighed down by adult worries she became, magic and innocence still existed in the orchard's promise. Professor Cooper and Dr. Morgan returned with news that the State Archaeological Office had granted an exploratory permit with conditions a certified archaeologist must oversee the dig, and any historically significant artifacts must be documented for the state's registry. Evelyn happily agreed, seeing it as a fair trade-off to protect the orchard's heritage. A woman named Dr. Nina Caldwell, an experienced archaeologist specializing in Civil War-era sites, was assigned to lead the excavation. Evelyn called Dr. Caldwell and found her to be practical yet passionate, eager to begin once the soil was workable enough to dig. Throughout March, the weather swung unpredictably from warm sunshine to chilly rain, delaying the orchard excavation. In the meantime, the orchard itself was stirring. Buds swelled on the branches, and a faint blush of new life colored each row. Evelyn took daily walks, carefully pruning or tidying. She marveled at how nature moved forward, indifferent to legalities or controversies. The orchard simply grew, following a cycle of renewal as ancient as time. If only human affairs could be so straightforward. She mused. Surrounded by budding apple trees, she whispered a silent prayer that when they did break ground, they'd do justice to whatever stories and secrets emerged from the soil. By early April, the ground finally thawed enough for Dr. Nina Caldwell's team to commence the orchard excavation. Under a mild, overcast sky, a small crew arrived in a van filled with shovels, trowels, sifting screens, and labeled storage boxes. Evelyn stood with them at the orchard's edge, the faint perfume of budding flowers drifting through the air. A cluster of onlookers, including Joan, Rosemary, Professor Cooper, Dr. Morgan, and even the children observed from a respectful distance. Darlene was present too, ready to address any legal concerns if Randolph or his people showed up. Dr. Caldwell and her assistants carefully measured and taped off a rectangular grid around the GPR's flagged site. They consulted the scans, then began the meticulous process of scraping away the topsoil layer by layer. With each trowel scrape, Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. She could almost sense the orchard bracing itself, as if ready to relinquish secrets long held in its embrace. After about 2 hours, one of the assistants tapped on a hard surface. Everyone rushed closer, straining to see. The archaeologist brushed away soil, revealing the faint outline of a wooden structure, likely the top of a crate or box. Dr. Caldwell signaled for calm, instructing her team to slow down and document each step with photographs and notes. Bit by bit, they cleared the surrounding dirt. The shape resembled a long wooden crate, reinforced with metal banding. Despite its apparent age, it remained surprisingly intact, protected by the orchard's stable soil conditions. Evelyn could hardly breathe when Dr. Caldwell used a brush to expose a rusted latch. Carefully, the archaeologist tested it. The latch gave way with a quiet snap, and the worn lid creaked open. The crowd hushed, craning their necks. Inside lay several cylindrical containers made of tin or possibly old steel. Each was sealed. The exteriors etched with faint markings. One container had a label that read R. Intel, 1864, barely visible through rust. Another carried stenciled letters that might once have spelled Pinkerton. Dr. Morgan leaned forward, eyes shining. These are war-era canisters. They might hold documents, or letters, or even personal effects. They removed the canisters gently, placing them in padded crates. Beneath them lay a few smaller wooden boxes, also sealed. One had chipped paint that suggested it once bore the Union Army insignia. Dr. Caldwell whistled. This is a rare find. Original military storage could contain anything from medical records to dispatches. Professor Cooper theorized the orchard might have been chosen for burial because orchard ground is relatively stable, and the family wanted these items hidden from Confederate raids or prying eyes. While onlookers whispered excitedly, Evelyn felt an overwhelming blend of awe and humility. She realized the orchard had effectively guarded these canisters for a century and a half. If not for Pinkerton's cryptic references, they might have stayed buried forever, slowly decaying in the earth. She crouched down, running her fingers over the soil. "Thank you," she murmured, as if speaking to the orchard itself. A gentle breeze seemed to rustle the budding branches overhead, as though acknowledging her gratitude. Now, the real work understanding and preserving this newly unearthed legacy was about to begin. Over the following days, Dr. Caldwell's team carefully transported the orchard's newly unearthed items to a secured workspace inside the Renshaw barn, which had been cleared and partially fitted with climate controls. The barn's loft served as a staging area, where each container was cataloged, photographed, and gently opened under the supervision of experts. Evelyn, accompanied by Professor Cooper and Dr. Morgan, hovered in the background, eager yet respectful of the professionals' methods. The first canister revealed a roll of documents that appeared to be coded telegrams and field reports from Union intelligence. Dr. Morgan's jaw dropped at the volume and clarity of the texts. "Some of these might be Pinkerton's original dispatches," she said, pointing to one dated 1864 detailing Confederate troop movements near the Kansas-Missouri border. Another set contained personal letters with references to emancipated individuals, possibly listing names, ages, and details of routes leading north. This was an emotional moment for the entire team, confirming that the orchard likely served as a clandestine archive of both military and humanitarian efforts. In a second container, they discovered a series of diaries written by various hands, one labeled M. Renshaw, 1863, another scrawled with Confidential Journal, Pinkerton Agent Number 14. Pages crackled with age, their ink occasionally blurred by moisture, but the text remained mostly legible. With each diary opened, glimpses of everyday life during the Civil War sprang forth. Certain passages describe feeding and sheltering runaway slaves in the orchard's hidden cellars. Other entries detailed coded communication systems used by Pinkerton's operatives, referencing safe houses across Kansas. Dr. Caldwell explained that such diaries were exceptionally rare, especially ones directly linking Pinkerton agents to Underground Railroad stations. Evelyn watched the experts handle the artifacts with reverence, using cotton gloves and special humidity-controlled cabinets. She felt a tightness in her chest, a combination of awe and responsibility. Years ago, she'd been struggling just to keep a roof over her family's head. Now she oversaw the unveiling of a lost chapter in American history. She recalled her initial dread at discovering old trunks and letters, fearing they'd complicate her life. While they certainly had, she also realized how fulfilling it was to be part of something meaningful, giving voice to those who'd risked their lives for freedom. That evening, the barn closed up for security, and Evelyn escorted the children back to the farmhouse. Over dinner, she tried to explain in simple terms what the team had found. Thomas grinned wide-eyed, imagining secret spy missions and heroic rescues. Abigail appeared more reflective, asking if any of the runaway slaves were kids her age. Maybe, Evelyn answered softly. We don't know yet, but if they were, I hope they made it to a safer place. Abigail nodded, her face solemn. Before bedtime, Evelyn stepped onto the porch, gazing at the orchard under the moonlight. The boxes, diaries, and canisters were now part of a delicate puzzle that revealed the Renshaw family's unwavering stance for justice. It wasn't just about forging a personal legacy for her own family. It was about honoring the countless souls whose footsteps once crossed these fields. She silently promised them, wherever they might rest, that their courage would not be forgotten. In the stillness of that moment, the orchard's rustling branches felt like a quiet affirmation the farm had spoken, and she was listening. As news of the orchard excavation spread, media inquiries began flowing once again, more numerous and bolder than before. Local reporters wanted interviews, while a few national outlets expressed interest in covering the discovery. One enthusiastic producer even proposed a documentary, offering to bring a camera crew to the farm for exclusive footage. The onslaught overwhelmed Evelyn. She stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, scanning emails that ranged from serious scholarly interest to sensational headlines like Ghosts of the Underground Railroad. Found in Kansas Orchard, Darlene Foster recommended a cautious approach. You can't ignore them all, but you can set terms. Insist on a contract or a set of guidelines. Don't let anyone exploit the story for cheap thrills. Joan Henderson chimed in, reminding Evelyn that the farm's privacy was still paramount, especially for the children's well-being. Find the right balance. Joan said, you have something the public wants to learn about, but that doesn't mean throwing open your doors to every camera that comes knocking. Despite the chaos, Dr. Caldwell's team maintained a steady, measured pace. Over the course of a week, they opened additional crates revealing genealogical records, testimonies of freed individuals, and communications that detailed Pinkerton's collaboration with local farmers. One compelling letter, addressed to Agent Thompson, listed instructions for forging identity papers so families could safely pass through Union-held areas. Dr. Morgan nearly teared up reading it. This is living proof of how ordinary citizens fought against the injustice of slavery, she whispered. It's not just war strategy, it's human decency in action. Amid this fervor, the Randolph-Renshaw lawyers reemerged, sending a formal notice that they had an immediate and vested interest in the orchard find. Darlene curtly responded, pointing out that the orchard find was lawfully on Evelyn's property. If they wanted to claim lineage-based rights, they could do so through the courts, but no excavation or artifact removal had occurred without proper oversight. Privately, Evelyn braced herself for another escalation. She dreaded the idea of a drawn-out legal fight overshadowing such a profound historical discovery. On a bright Tuesday afternoon, a pair of black SUVs pulled into the driveway unannounced, raising everyone's suspicions. Out stepped a middle-aged man in a crisp suit and a younger associate. Before Dr. Caldwell's team could question them, the older man strode up to Evelyn. Miss Brooks, he said. All business, I'm William Gregg, representing the Randolph-Renshaw estate. Evelyn's tension rose. "This is private property," she said firmly, though her heart thumped. "If you have questions, contact my lawyer." Greg cast a glance at the orchard, then held up a folder. "We have every right to verify these so-called artifacts on behalf of our client. You've made this a very public affair, and we intend to ensure no portion of the Renshaw inheritance is mishandled." Anger flared within Evelyn, but she managed a controlled tone. "You need a court order or my permission to step onto that orchard, and you don't have either right now." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but Darlene, who'd come outside, showed up at Evelyn's side with her cell phone camera recording. "You are trespassing." "Mr. Greg," Darlene warned, "unless you step back to public property, go ahead and call your client. We can handle this in court if you insist." Greg's associate tugged on his sleeve, urging him to retreat. After a tense moment, they turned back to the SUVs and sped away, leaving dust in their wake. Evelyn exhaled shakily, thankful she'd held her ground. The orchard's secrets would not be bullied into some grab for profit. But each such confrontation chipped at her peace, underscoring how valuable and vulnerable these discoveries truly were. Following the unsettling encounter with Randolph Renshaw's representatives, Evelyn found it difficult to concentrate on the orchard's hopeful narrative. She lay awake at night, fear and frustration swirling. The orchard's newly discovered diaries and letters testified to people who risked everything for freedom. Yet here she was, fighting off opportunists who cared more about ownership and money than preserving that legacy. One evening, she slipped downstairs, brewed some chamomile tea, and started leafing through Anna Renshaw's 1943 diary again. Searching for perspective, she discovered a passage Anna wrote after learning the farm's Civil War background. Anna wrestled with the weight of ancestral duty, lamenting how greedy men might someday lay claim to what they never worked for. Reading those words, Evelyn felt a kinship across time. Anna, too, feared the day people would step in to exploit the farm's heritage. Yet Anna also penned a resolute hope: a new caretaker will rise when needed, prepared by hardship, softened by empathy, unafraid to protect what is right. Evelyn found those lines hauntingly applicable. She wondered if Anna had envisioned someone like her, an unlikely widow who stumbled onto the farm out of desperation, only to become its protector. In the morning, she confronted the daily task with renewed determination. The orchard blossomed fully now, pink and white flowers adorning branches that only months ago were frozen and stark. She loved walking amidst the rows, inhaling the sweet scent, feeling a gentle reminder that life persevered. She and Rosemary set about cleaning the farmhouse from top to bottom, anticipating visitors. Dr. Caldwell had completed her initial catalog, and soon there would be deeper analysis by a broader historical panel. Evelyn wanted the house presentable, if not perfect. A quiet sense of victory came when the children returned from school one afternoon, excitedly announcing they had new classmates interested in seeing Lincoln's letters. Instead of dreaded media harassment, it was simple childhood curiosity, a sign that, at least locally, the farm's story inspired wonder rather than greed. Evelyn smiled, reminding them that proper tours might start once everything was set up for public viewing. For now, she told them, the orchard was still a place for them to run and play, bridging imagination with history in a way they might only truly appreciate when they were older. Outside, in the last golden rays of daylight, she spotted Joan Henderson hauling a wheelbarrow of mulch towards some freshly planted saplings near the orchard's edge. Joan had proposed planting a few new apple varieties, symbolizing the farm's rebirth. Evelyn joined her, taking a shovel to help spread mulch. As they worked, she confided her worries about the Randolph legal skirmishes. Joan paused, leaning on the shovel. "Look at these saplings," she said, her voice calm. "They're just little sticks now, but given time, water, and care, they'll grow strong. The same goes for you, for this farm, for the legacy you're rebuilding. Don't let the weeds of greed choke the good roots you've set down." In that simple analogy, Evelyn found solace. The orchard, the diaries, the letters, all of it was about growth, resilience, and nurturing hope across generations. If she could stay true to that purpose, perhaps the Randolph threats would fade like weeds pulled from the soil. She tossed another shovel of mulch around the sapling, silently thanking Joan for her quiet wisdom. Together, they'd ensure the orchard continued to bloom both literally and metaphorically despite the storm clouds of conflict gathering on the horizon. With the orchard in full bloom and the barn's makeshift archival lab humming with activity, Dr. Caldwell and her team began unveiling the orchard diaries to the public through carefully curated blog posts and scanned images. In short digital bursts, they highlighted entries about secret codes, local families who'd assisted the cause, and Pinkerton's cunning infiltration methods. Online engagement soared. Readers from across the country left comments praising the farm's historical importance, while others expressed shock at learning how deeply local farmers had contributed to the war effort. Evelyn noticed an uptick in visitors to the county's library exhibit on the Renshaw documents. Edna Lawson reported that the small display of scanned artifacts was drawing record crowds, prompting talks of expanding the exhibit or even establishing a permanent mini-museum. The library's director asked if Evelyn might donate a few orchard diaries for permanent display, but Dr. Morgan cautioned that the diaries should remain in climate-controlled storage until fully preserved. Evelyn agreed the diaries deserved professional care first. Still, she felt a rush of gratitude. People genuinely cared about this history, wanting to learn and preserve rather than exploit. It reaffirmed her decision to be transparent rather than secretive. Behind the scenes, however, legal maneuvering persisted. Randolph's lawyers continued to bombard Darlene with threats of imminent legal action. One morning, Darlene called with a slight urgency in her voice. They've filed a petition in county court. They claim your orchard excavations are part of a deliberate plan to conceal inherited property from rightful descendants. It's a stretch, but they might try to freeze further research until a judge rules. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. She'd done everything above board, so the accusation stung. "Let them come," she said softly, anger trembling under her words. "We have the truth on our side." Within days, the court set a hearing date. Darlene asked Professor Cooper, Dr. Morgan, and Dr. Caldwell to provide affidavits attesting to the legitimate historical research and preservation efforts at the farm. Joan also wrote a statement detailing how Evelyn invited the community to witness the orchard excavation from day one. With these testimonies in hand, Evelyn went to the courthouse, determined not to be intimidated by Randolph's legal theatrics. The hearing itself took place in a modest courtroom with high windows that let in mid-morning sun. Randolph's side presented a series of genealogical charts and implied that Evelyn was profiteering off heirloom property. Darlene countered with property deeds, historical society endorsements, and academic letters verifying the orchard's historical significance. Evelyn sat quietly, resisting the urge to interject, trusting Darlene's steady logic. Finally, Professor Cooper took the stand, explaining with a calm authority how they discovered the orchard items through GPR and archaeological best practices. His testimony struck a chord with the judge, who asked pointed questions about the orchard's usage over the last 150 years. After a tense pause, the judge dismissed Randolph's request for an immediate injunction, citing a lack of compelling evidence that Evelyn was hiding anything or acting in bad faith. The relief that washed over Evelyn felt like a physical weight lifting off her shoulders. Randolph's lawyers glowered, but they'd lost this round. As Evelyn left the courtroom, her children in tow, she stepped into the bright spring sunlight. She couldn't stop a small grin from forming. Though the battle wasn't necessarily over, the orchard and all it held would remain safely in her stewardship for now. And that victory, however modest, tasted sweeter than any apple she could ever hope to harvest. A few days after the court hearing, Evelyn organized a modest celebration at the farmhouse to thank everyone who had supported her in the orchard's restoration. Neighbors, volunteers, historical society members, and Dr. Caldwell's team gathered in the yard, sharing potluck dishes under a sunny sky. A soft breeze carried the fragrance of apple blossoms in full splendor, and children scurried around with laughter, playing tag among the orchard rows. Even Rosemary and Joan, usually bustling with tasks, took a moment to sit on the porch swing, sipping iced tea and watching the festivities. In a short speech, Evelyn expressed her gratitude. She reminded everyone how a mere 8 months ago, She was a desperate widow bidding on an abandoned farm, clueless about the treasures beneath its soil. Now, the orchard and its diaries were poised to alter the county's historical narrative, maybe even the nation's understanding of Civil War intelligence and the bravery of ordinary farmers who aided enslaved families. She thanked Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Morgan for their tireless research, Professor Cooper for advocating so eloquently in court, and Darlene for her unwavering legal guidance. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she concluded, "Without each of you, this farm's voice might have stayed silent." Under the barn's newly repaired roof, a few tables showcased images of the orchard vault and excerpts from diaries, attracting curious glances from neighbors who hadn't seen them yet. Dr. Caldwell stood by, explaining details. In one photo, a specific diary page mentioned a young girl traveling north, referencing how the orchard's bloom signaled hope in her darkest hour. "If only she could see this now," Dr. Caldwell murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Her story isn't lost. It's blossoming here again." Later, Abigail and Thomas, brimming with excitement, dragged Evelyn to the orchard's gazebo. They'd filled it with simple decorations, paper chains, fresh flowers, and a handwritten sign reading, "Friendship and Freedom." The children insisted it be a place for reflection and gratitude. Evelyn's heart swelled. She knelt down, hugging them. "You two have turned a broken-down gazebo into something truly beautiful," she whispered. They beamed, proud of their contribution. As dusk approached, most guests departed, leaving only a handful of close friends and family by the orchard. Joan, her arm around Evelyn's shoulder, surveyed the blossoming rose. "Look at that," she said softly. "Spring at the orchard. It's like the land is celebrating too." Evelyn breathed in the floral air, recalling her darkest days after Michael died, thinking she'd never feel hopeful again. Now she stood on ground steeped in sacrifice and courage, forging her own chapter in the farm's ongoing legacy. Standing among the blossoms, she silently promised that no matter what further legal challenges arose, the orchard's story would remain a testament to unity and perseverance, just as Lincoln's letter had once urged. In that promise lay her purpose. The orchard might see more trials, but it would also bear more fruit. In every petal drifting on the evening breeze, Evelyn sensed the farm's enduring spirit. The diaries, the orchard vault, the hidden chest in the cellar, each thread of history wove into a tapestry that bound the past to the present. And as the final light faded behind the farmhouse, she felt certain that a brighter future, rooted in these newly revealed truths, was not just possible, it was blossoming right before her eyes. Looking back, it's astonishing how a single choice bidding on a rundown farm changed so many lives. The house is no longer silent and full of shadows. It's now a vibrant home where hope, history, and hard work coexist. The orchard, once overgrown and ignored, has blossomed into a place where community members gather to celebrate, learn, and honor those who risked everything for freedom. For me, Mayo, this has been the most personal, transformative journey imaginable. I hope this story reminds us all that genuine courage often comes from ordinary people in extraordinary times, and that the past can guide us to be better in the present. Thank you for joining this journey and sharing in the wonder of Renshaw Farmstead. Please leave your comments, thoughts, or questions below. I'd love to hear your insights. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more stories and discussions. Let's keep the conversation going.